This is the Tom Anderson Show, broadcasting live from the KVNT studios, 7 to 9 a.m., Monday through Friday.
So yesterday, we heard from Americans for Prosperity State of Alaska Director Bernadette Wilson, and she discussed House Bill 55, which is legislation that would bring back, in part, defined benefits for a specific occupation, and that would be, and Chuck Kopp is with us, so he can define it even better, but peace officers, law enforcement, he can explain who the recipient, the benefactor would be to that end. And Bernadette went through elements that she deemed relevant, that it's not going to help recruitment or retention. It's going to cost a lot of money. It could be a gateway to income tax and sales tax. And I tossed in to the mix, look at who the sponsors are, but for State Representative Sarah Rasmussen and State Representative Kelly Merrick from Eagle River, who are both considered definitely moderates, and Merrick definitely union centric because of her husband Joey and his act. I mean, he's not a wallflower. He's very, very aggressively active. Maybe great guy, maybe brilliant guy, maybe thoughtful guy, but he's out there. And so I'm bringing these up in advance of Chuck talking about it, so he knows the different vantage points and where people are coming from. Is it right? Is it left? Is it union, non-union? Is it just the right thing to do for law enforcement? But that's what we heard from Bernadette Wilson. We're making a YouTube video, so if you're watching this on YouTube, you will have already watched the first segment with Bernadette. Now we've got former state representative, former chief of police, Kenai, Anchorage Police Department, polygrapher. He's done it all. And then, of course, 2 terms, just like I was in 2 terms in the state legislature representing the Kenai Peninsula. Chuck, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Tom. Thank you for having me on the air this morning. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about a class of employees I know we all care about very much. And I also want to recognize your father, too, and his great contribution to Alaska and his leadership of the troopers.
Hey, very kind. I was mentioning Dad because 2 days ago, and he's so humble, he doesn't talk about it, but 2 days ago, he sent me a photo, and he got, the first time they've given this a Lifetime Achievement Award for 50 years with the Alaska Peace Officers Association. Dad is turning 84 this year, and he's been active. He also started with Bert McQueen, the Alaska Police and Fire Chaplains Ministries, and then he got the Lifetime Achievement Award from the troopers. So, I mean, he's old enough. You and I are same age to be your dad. You can imagine someone at that age, he's been involved a long time. So thank you for that. And I'm glad we said it on the YouTube video because I'm proud of my pop. But I'm proud of you, too, for your long time, decades of public service in law enforcement, then as a policymaker. So you're someone that I think can speak with authority, with polite, not just interest, but a nexus to this, because I know that you've had injuries and healthcare matters, retirement matters for what you went through. Let's talk about, from a peace officer, from a cop's perspective, why House Bill 55 is needed and what it would do so people understand.
Thank you, Tom. Sure. So, as a police officer, when you enter the profession, you accept that there are extraordinary risks and sacrifice, that the recruitment people actually go through you. Just so you're not under any illusion, one of the first things that we did when I was an Anchorage Reserve officer beginning my career is we went and visited the Alaska Law Enforcement Officers Memorial, and we walked up, and I remember our training officer had us put our hands on the marble slab and run over the names and said, these are the people who went before you. Do not let them down. They gave it all for their community and the state, and don't go into this job unless you know that this is an outcome that can happen. We're going to train you every day so that it does not happen, so that you do go home safe, but it is a reality, and we want you to think about the loved ones that are still here today that are attached to those names that are the living. And it was very sobering. It got all of our undivided attention. And but it was reality. This is the class of employees that begins that with their career by saying, as a law enforcement officer, my fundamental duty is to serve all mankind, to safeguard lives and property, to protect the weak from oppression and intimidation, to protect peaceful from violence and disorder. And, there's no other vocation that calls you into that, where when the shooting starts, when the violence happens, and when trauma strikes, that they're the ones going to do the rescuing, to stop the shooter, and to restore, peace from chaos. And that's what that job does. Now, as you can imagine, it's a young person's game. The men and women who do that job take a terrific physical, emotional, psychological beating over the course of their career. You might not think of what it means to have your adrenaline spiked, 10 times in a day. But, it's not like you can just go out and run 2 miles to run off the adrenaline or slowly calm down, when you're going call to call. And that's why the life expectancy is shorter for public safety for police officers. It averages 20 years less than the average, male or female lifespan. And so the life insurance actuaries take that into equation when they write you a policy. You pay more if you've been a career police officer. But, but back to this bill, Tom, what we're talking about, we got away from a pension system for public safety and all public employees back in 2006 for a reason of that it was expensive. It was incurring an unfunded liability to the state, and the state was rightfully concerned. Now, how did that happen? Well, we know that our actuaries, who are telling us what rate of contribution for the state to put in, were lying to us. The state sued the actuaries, and they won. Now, unfortunately, the state did not recover nearly what our unfunded liability had become. So all public employee defined benefit plans went to a straight, basically a 401k type system, what they call the defined contribution, and all the liability went away from the state. And there was much debate, as to what that outcome would be. Even, some conservative Republicans, Nancy Dahlstrom among them, argued on the floor that this could come back to be a recruitment retention issue down the road. We can't, we're just passing this policy. It's hard to foresee the future, but is there any middle ground that we have? And the legislature honestly debated that, and they didn't have a plan in front of them where they could figure out how they could avoid another multi-billion-dollar unfunded liability. So for the last 15 years, this has been where we're at. And what we've seen, particularly in the public safety job class, as produced in the Department of Public Safety's, the State Trooper Annual Report, they did a special recruitment retention issue where they highlighted that their number one problem of not being able to hire in people as fast as they're losing them is the lack of a secure, stable financial retirement. And so they're training new troopers at a cost of $200,000 a year, and within 2 to 3 years, they're rotating back out of state into agencies that have a defined benefit retirement. Now, it's not just the troopers, it's the Alaska Association of Chiefs of Police, the Alaska Fire Chiefs Association, and these aren't labor people. These are the leaders, non-union employees of these organizations saying,
and Chuck,
hey,
let me jump in.
Yeah.
It's not just policemen, it's also corrections and firemen.
Yes, also corrections and firemen. And we know the correctional officers, struggle in a very confined environment, doing inmate population control, providing care 24/7, 365 to obviously a troubled population. We know that more than 70% of people in prison have serious mental health issues. And our correctional officers get in wrestling matches every day just trying to keep, the peace and order of the population. And 99% of the time, they do it great. But that 1% of the time, something goes south in some institution, it makes headlines. But those guys, those men and women have a really tough job. And we know that the firemen also, the same stress of shift work, the same response. A lot of people forget that the firemen are the ones that deal with the medical trauma so much. When you have the multiple child fatalities, the, two kids on a highway, smucked by a car, and then dealing with that aftermath, the transporting of victims' bodies, and dealing with families afterwards, very similar to police. And the police are always so grateful for the firemen because they're the ones that do the medical trauma treatment, and frankly, to the cops too. They keep us alive when we're the ones that have been shot or injured, or sometimes they use their huge apparatus to block a line of fire to protect a scene, to be able to pull a wounded officer away. It's a mutual edification, survival, teamwork approach to get through a public safety career. And it takes these special people who are willing to do that. And they do it for each other first, because they're not going to let the person seated next to them down. That's the bottom line. Then they do it, for their team, and they do it for the city, and they do it for the state. The bottom line is you do it to keep your brother, your sister next to you alive for that shift. But this pension plan and the cost is a real fair question, and I think it's fairly debated. And we can't let some of the emotion of what happened color what this bill is.
And I want to get into the bill, Chuck. Well, Chuck, we're talking with former State Representative Chuck Kopp, and we've inched into the break, so we're going to come back if he can stick with us, and we will wrap up with delineating what the bill does and then how he thinks it will recruit and enhance that, and where that's going to help Alaska's. Then we'll wrap it up, and you can decide, folks. You can decide if you want to call your lawmakers to pass it or not. Stay with us. Tommy.
This is the Tom Anderson Show, broadcasting live from the KVNT studios, 7 to 9 a.m., Monday through Friday.
State Representative Chuck Kopp with us, and former Chief of Police in Kenai, former Anchorage Police Department officer, and dabbled Department of Public Safety. He's been in all of those venues, and he is one of the advocates leading the charge for House Bill 55, and that would bring defined benefits for peace officers back. And Chuck, there's history here, and there is politicization here because of the sponsors. Currently, they're Democrats, but it wasn't always like that, and this has been debated for a while, hasn't it? It's not a new idea, and this one's a little bit more constructed towards peace officers, correct?
Yes, Tom. In fact, you bring up a good point. This has always been an issue that Republicans, the right side of the aisle, have carried before. In fact, I've been tracking this a good part of my public safety career. In fact, you, Tom, back in, I think it was 2003 or 4, when you were in the legislature, carried a bill to advance a sound public safety retirement system just for law enforcement officers. But
you have a good memory, brother. You have a good. Where were you at in 2003? Were you APD or Kenai?
Yeah. I was chief of police in Kenai, and in fact, in 2003, my dear friend John Watson was killed on a domestic violence call Christmas Day. But that was when you were serving in the legislature, and
we really pushed it, Chuck. We pushed it for peace officers.
Yeah, well, I remember
we did.
how much that meant to law enforcement at the time. But I also remember the trouble. You and Mike Hawker, another strong conservative. But it got Christmas treed, and I recall it going down in flames because too many groups were trying to get on that.
Janitors and secretaries. This bill is not like that, is it?
Right. But even, coming forward from that, this was always a Republican bill. Senator Pete Kelly from Fairbanks, no one ever accused him of being a left-leaning person. You guys, I'm sure you know the Kelly family, but
sure.
Then we had, Representative Sharice Millett, then myself carried it, and then finally the first Democrat to carry it, Andy Josephson. And I think that, so this is not a right-left thing. Unfortunately, in a very politically charged climate, we see people fearful of working together on issues that both sides really agree matters. And I know even on the Senate side, in the Alaska Senate, if this gets on the floor, it's going to pass overwhelmingly with at least 15 or 16 votes. It may be more than that. It could be 19-1, but it will pass overwhelmingly. It's a matter of just the politically charged environment that we don't see, more sponsors that show bipartisanship. But Tom, to your point, also, this bill is dramatically different than how it's been portrayed by the opposition from previous defined benefit tiers. For instance, pre-Medicare health care coverage accounts for roughly 1/3 of the cost paid under the old tiers. And under House Bill 55, that pre-Medicare coverage is gone. It is gone. There is no pre-Medicare. So if you retire at 55, which this bill establishes a minimum retirement age of at 55, even if you're eligible with your 20 years of service well before that, you could work from 24 to 44, get 20 years in. You will have to wait till you're 55 to draw your retirement. And even then, you don't have a health care plan. You have a health savings account to go out and find a plan that you can afford with that money that's been put in, basically 3% per year of your salary, built up over time. Hopefully you'll have enough time to buy yourself a health care plan to get you through to 65 years of age when you get on Medicare. This is not a golden parachute. So, the minimum age is frankly one reason why we haven't had a whole bunch of public safety groups just thrilled about this, because of the high risk of injury and disability that occurs in the job when your job is to wrestle, addicts and dealers and people who are carjacking or trying to steal cars or, running from businesses, after a burglary or, whatever calls you're on. It's a very physical job. You're always wrestling, always. Police work is a contact sport. It is hands-on. Firemen the same way, hauling people, heavy equipment, hoses, carrying people up and down stairs. I mean, this is something where the body accrues injuries and disabilities.
And let's say the bill passes. So therefore, you believe this defined benefits, the whole structure needs to change. Do you think we have the money? And do you think it will make a difference? Those are some of the points that Bernadette thoughtfully brought up yesterday. And I think that certainly Alaska Policy Forum, Lida Green wrote an opinion editorial. The conservatives are coming up saying, even if we have the money, now's not the right time. Is your point that we have so much money that there is an ability to do this and not affect, would it be a blip on the economic radar, or indeed would it be a gateway?
Yes, so great question, Tom. So again, this will not be a blip on the economic radar, as you say. The 10% COLA of previous tiers, 10% cost of living allowance for being Alaska residents is gone. And also, it allows the Alaska Retirement Management Board to raise the employee contribution rate. Never before has the risk been shared. So they can raise your contribution rate if the plan is funded less than 90%. There is no COLA. There's no inflation proofing. Can you imagine today where your dollar is becoming, it's evaporating, right? A truck costs $60,000 now. There's no inflation proofing anymore. That goes away if the plan is not funded at 90% or more. All these things make it so that the total cost to the state is about $5 million per year for this plan. Now, let's just put that into comparison. The municipalities and state agencies are losing $41 million a year in training costs. I'm sorry, $8 million a year, $41 million over 5 years. So you have an $8 million sunk cost for status quo, or a $5 million cost to improve this plan that we know will dramatically improve recruitment and retention. Higher pay helps with recruitment. It does not help with retention. Retention is about the pension and the security of that. Now, also, you just brought up the cost. We're arguing about the size of the dividend, right? Whether it's $1,200 as the House or $2,600 might be coming out of the Senate, I'm not sure. But one fully funded dividend will cost the state about another $700 million more than what's in the budget now. That would pay for 140 years of the cost of this peace officer, firefighter retirement plan. one dividend, 1 year, one full dividend would pay 140 years cost of this plan. That's why I say it's not even a blip on the radar. And I just frankly think I want to say it's ignorance or misunderstanding. It is an ideology. You know, the advocates against this are paid to be against it. They have not presented an actual actuary who's trained, but independent actuaries, the state's actuary, and the state of Alaska's chief investment officer all agree that this plan is very conservative. It's almost bulletproof under a huge range of market assumptions. And this plan will make it, even in a high 5% return market environment, as far as staying funded 90% or more, where the actual market return has been 8% or more over the last 30 years.
But let me jump in. You mentioned about paid advocates. I mean, aren't you paid? Who's your client for this? I assume you're not calling in for goodwill and kindness, too. Maybe so, but I mean, you have a client, correct?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you could say as a legislator, you know, was I a paid advocate for the plan? As a consultant now on this, am I a paid advocate? Yes. I mean, I was paid by constituents before to represent. Now I'm a consultant. This is one of the things I do consult in, and I absolutely acknowledge that I'm paid. But I would also say this. I think my perspective is different because I have been responsible for the state's budget. I have been responsible for the big picture, both with agencies, public safety agencies, both with the state of Alaska. I do get, and also I get the difference between labor and management, and this is not a labor bill. Labor is contract negotiations that occur on an annual basis, specifically talking about non-retirement benefits. A retirement benefits is strictly a state of Alaska responsibility.
Where you delineate it. Sure. Well, real quick, we got about 20 seconds left. How can someone follow this? Do they look up HB 55 and contact their lawmakers?
Yes, House Bill 55. You can contact, Representative Andy Josephson's office,
yep.
or
any of the sponsors. No, for sure.
Any of the sponsors could talk about it, or myself.
Chuck Kopp, thank you for your time. Counterpoint Point, Bernadette Wilson and Chuck Kopp. You can watch the YouTube video. Thanks for your time, Chuck. Stay with us. Thanks. Tom Anderson Show.